Okay, so chapter 25 is another review from some of the stuff we talked about in the fall semester. It's called Conflict and Anger Management. It's a little bit of a long chapter, but it's got some really good strategies for conflict resolution. So here are our objectives for chapter 25. So these are the things we're going to discuss. The first thing you really need to know is how conflict is defined. And we've kind of talked about this before. Maybe the definition is slightly different, but it's the same idea. So, conflict is a state of opposition or hostility. It could be a fight or a struggle, or the clashing of opposing principles or ideas. So, conflict involves an emotional or cognitive struggle with something. So, two people usually have contradictory ways of viewing a situation, and conflict is kind of what's created when those contradictory views come into play. So, conflict management is being able to control yourself when you feel conflicted. So, you have these different ideas, and you can hear that somebody is saying something you completely disagree with, but being able to control yourself and not just explode on somebody is being able to have good conflict management. Learning to manage your conflicts and anger is going to increase your emotional intelligence, and of course also enhance your ability to be successful and happy, because people don't like to be around other people who are constantly, sort of exploding due to conflicts or due to anger. You are viewed as a more emotionally healthy person if you are able to manage your conflicts and your anger. So your book talks about 5 different styles of conflict management. It talks about competing, avoiding, compromising, accommodating, and collaborating. Now, you can see the word consensus under collaborate. The reason it doesn't have a number beside it, because consensus is dealing with the group, but it's the same as number 5, collaborate. So it's still just number 5, but one of them is in a group of people and one of them is without having a group of people. So we'll talk about that in just a second. So the first type of conflict resolver is to compete. So people who have the style of believing that everything is a competition, they see things as I win, you lose, and the focus often is only on winning and being victorious. And this can be a very aggressive way of handling situations. The second way is to avoid it. There are some people who avoid conflict at all cost, and that's having the idea of you win, I hide, I'm not participating in this. The focus in this case is on ignoring the conflict completely and just hoping that it'll go away. It's like hiding from the problem and not dealing with it. Since we're at home, we all get to watch all of these wonderful shows. So I was just thinking the other day when I was watching some reality television that avoiding is what a lot of people on reality television do. Well, not all of them, because sometimes they fight, but some just walk away and say, I don't want to deal with this. And that is not a good way to handle the conflict. Number 3 is to accommodate. And that's to say, you win, I lose. And the focus is on giving the other person, just giving in and letting them just kind of have it. Kind of being like a doormat, letting people walk all over you, accommodating other people's feelings. That is not going to lead to happiness if you're just constantly diminishing your own feelings and giving in to everybody else's. So you can see from those very first 3 we talked about, competing, avoiding, and accommodating, these are not healthy ways to manage conflict. So number 4 is to compromise. And that's neither of us is going to win in this situation. The focus here is on figuring out a workable solution to the issue, but nobody's going to win. Sometimes compromise can be the only way of successfully resolving a conflict. I'm sure if you asked your parents, a lot of times in marriage, you have to just compromise. Like there's no win or lose. It's just, okay, this is how we're going to do it. And this is what's going to let us have peace and harmony. And number 5 is to collaborate. So that when you collaborate, it is a win-win situation. We both are going to win. The focus in collaborating is on each person getting what they want. I also want to be clear that collaboration is the most effective conflict management style. It's the healthiest of all of them. And that is because both parties are happy with the results and each person's stress is reduced. Now, remember, I told you about consensus. I'm not sure why it's not showing up at the bottom of the screen. But on the next slide here, consensus is the same as collaborate, but it's when you have three or more people. So everybody in the group wins. So you come to a consensus, it's healthy, it's a win win situation for all parties involved, same as the collaboration style. So if you were to think about it, we know that avoiding, competing, and accommodating would be the negative ways to manage conflict, whereas consensus, collaborating, and compromise are going to be your healthier styles. And of course, what I just told you is here on this slide. Compromising, collaborating, and consensus are the best styles for managing conflict. Avoiding, competing, and accommodating are the worst styles. And if you had to guess why, what would be your reason? Well, if you think about it, everybody's needs are being met in compromising, collaborating, and consensus, or at least you're getting to a situation where nobody feels like I lost something. Whereas with competing, avoiding, and accommodating, you're not really dealing with the problem. And you have to always deal with the problem in order for it to really be resolved. And here are some ways to resolve conflict. So, first, you got to admit there's a problem. You got to recognize that the conflict does exist. Once you recognize that it exists, you've got to signal a timeout. So, okay, this is the issue. Let's take a timeout from it. We've got to do something about it. Step 3 is then define the conflict. So, how would we define what the real problem is? And then step 4 is conducting perspective taking with empathy. So that's listening to somebody else's perspective, putting yourself in their position and saying, okay, I understand where this other person is coming from. Step 5 is to discuss potential solutions. So then, okay, how could we solve this issue? And then realizing, we talked about before, whenever you're working with other people, it should be us against the assignment. It's us against the problem. So achieve a breakthrough, us against the problem. So we're working together through this. And then step 7 is to follow the 2 cardinal rules of conflict management. And we're going to talk about what those 2 cardinal rules are. 2 cardinal rules of conflict management. This is a good test question. Don't ever withdraw, because that is a form of non-communication. And don't use power plays. Don't make it where you're backstabbing and you're saying really mean things. Like, it's not a game between the two of you. So don't try to pull your ace card. Don't come with receipts, anything like that. That is not going to solve the conflict. So the 2 cardinal rules of conflict management: do not withdraw, do not use power plays. And then once we talk about conflict, we also have to talk about anger. In psychology, I worked a lot with youth, primarily boys from the age of 13 to about 16, who were in the criminal justice system, and we had anger management groups with them every single day. And one thing all of those boys had to learn is that anger is not a primary emotion. Anger is a secondary emotion. It's always something that masks what's really going on with you. So our emotions should serve to support our behavior in times of stress and emergency. So every emotion you have is just trying to protect you. So anger is a psychological and physiological process of communicating. So whenever you get anger, you are mentally and physically trying to communicate something. But I want you to know that anger is also learned. Whenever you grow up in a stressful household with lots of anger and arguing, It can lead to a lot of stress, but it can also lead you to respond that way yourself when you become an adult, because that's what you learn to do when you're upset, is to yell and scream. Most of the time, primary targets of anger are usually your loved ones. So, it's kind of a funny thing, but people don't usually take their anger out on the person that deserves it. They usually take their anger out on the person who's safe, the person who's closest to them. And that might be usually a family member. Or secondary to anger targets are the people you don't like. So it's either you take it out on the people who are closest to you, who you know things are safe with, or you take it out on your enemies and the people you don't like. And that's how we have fights and conflicts at school and things like that. But we know that oftentimes when people get really upset, they're not really mad at the person they're displacing their anger towards. They're really probably upset about a lot of other things going on. But always know that anger is a choice, and you can choose not to be angry the same as you can choose to be angry. So, there are 3 ways to manage your anger. First, recognize that anger is a choice. So, once you can recognize it, then you can decide, okay, do I want to make this choice or do I want to make a different choice? And then, step 2 is to commit to release your anger. So, how are you going to release your anger? Are you going to take boxing so that you can release your anger on the boxing bag? Are you going to do any type of sport that helps you sort of release your anger? I don't know. Are you going to punch a pillow? Because, we can't do anything and release our anger that's going to be negative or that's going to cause us harm. And then step 3 is to immediately use what we call the SBTA method. It's a method that we'll talk in more detail about in chapter 27, but I'm going to briefly go over it with you today as well. So the SBTA method is to first stop. Whatever it is you're doing, just stop. If you're angry, stop. Then breathe. And you just can't just sit there and breathe. You have to breathe in a way that's really going to calm you down. So when I was a therapist, the way we taught our patients to breathe was to breathe in like you're smelling a flower, and then breathe out like you're blowing out a candle. You have to do that several times over and over again. So breathe in like you're smelling a flower, and then breathe out like you're blowing out a candle. Then the T is to think. So you have to think positively and you have to think presently. So don't think about what's happened. Think in the moment. I can do this. I'm in control. I can manage this. Whatever your positive self-talk statements are. And then after you've thought about it, then you can act. Then you can get back to work and do what you need to do so that you can focus and not let your emotions overcome you. And that is all of chapter 25, Conflict and Anger Management.